The bullet had a name on it, and that name was Vincent Moretti. I felt it before I heard it, a shift in the air, a wrongness that hummed beneath the surface of the champagne flutes and crystalline laughter. The grand ballroom of the Ashford estate glittered like a diamond caught in a snare, all vaulted ceilings and dripping chandeliers, the kind of place where men sold their souls for a seat at the table. Tonight, that table was mine. I owned this city, this state, half the shadows on the eastern seaboard. I had clawed my way up from the gutter with nothing but my fists and a hunger that devoured every man who stood in my way. And yet, standing here in my $1,000 suit, surrounded by the elite of New York's underworld, I felt the cold breath of a predator I could not see. My fiancée, Celeste, was a porcelain doll on my arm, her smile a perfect curve of practiced affection. She glittered in a gown of emerald silk, her blonde hair swept up in a cascade of diamonds that had cost more than most men earned in a lifetime. She leaned into me, her voice a silken murmur meant only for my ears. "Vincent, darling, you're brooding. This is supposed to be a celebration. 50 years of Moretti dominance. Smile for the photographers." I did not smile. I had not smiled since I was a boy, watching my father bleed out on a warehouse floor, his empire crumbling around him. I had rebuilt it from ash and bone, and I had learned one immutable truth in all that time: trust was a currency only fools spent freely. Tonight, every face in this room was a mask, and beneath the masks, I could smell the rot. The party was a spectacle of excess. A four-tiered cake adorned with spun sugar and gold leaf stood sentinel in the center of the room, surrounded by mountains of caviar and towers of champagne. Men in bespoke suits clapped each other on the back, their laughter hollow and brittle. Women in designer gowns fluttered like exotic birds, their eyes sharp and calculating. They were all here to pay homage to the king, to bask in the glow of my power. But I knew better. Kings were never more vulnerable than when they sat upon their thrones, and the vultures were always circling. I scanned the room with the practiced eye of a man who had survived 100 assassination attempts. My lieutenants were stationed at every exit, their faces carved from stone, their hands never straying far from the weapons hidden beneath their jackets. Marco, my head of security and the only man I trusted with my life, moved through the crowd with the silent grace of a predator. He caught my eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. All clear. But the knot in my stomach refused to loosen. Celeste squeezed my arm, her nails biting into the fabric of my sleeve. "Vincent, you're embarrassing me. These people are here to see you, not to watch you glare at the walls. At least pretend to enjoy yourself." I turned to her, my gaze cold and flat. "Enjoyment is a luxury I cannot afford, Celeste. Every smile in this room is a blade waiting to be drawn. Remember that." Her smile faltered, a flicker of annoyance crossing her perfect features. She was beautiful, brilliant, and utterly ruthless. It was why I had chosen her. But even she did not understand the weight of the crown I wore. The crown was not a prize. It was a cage, and the bars were forged from the bones of my enemies. The orchestra swelled into a waltz, and the guests drifted toward the dance floor, their laughter rising in a crescendo of false merriment. I remained rooted to the spot, my eyes scanning the shadows. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones, a primal instinct that had kept me alive long past my expiration date. And then I felt it. A tug at my trousers, so faint I almost dismissed it as a trick of the light. I looked down, and my breath caught in my throat. A boy, no older than 4, stood at my feet, his small hand clutching the hem of my pants. He was dressed in the simple uniform of a servant's child, his dark hair tousled, his eyes enormous and filled with a terror that cut through the noise of the ballroom like a knife. His mother, one of the maids, was rushing toward him, her face pale with panic, her mouth open in a silent scream of apology. But the boy did not look at his mother. He looked at me, his gaze piercing and strange, as if he could see something no one else could. "The flowers," he whispered, his voice trembling, barely audible above the music. "The flowers in the big room are making a mean noise." I froze. The big room. The grand salon where the gifts were displayed, where a massive floral arrangement had been delivered earlier that evening, a gift from a rival family as a gesture of peace. a gesture I had accepted with a smile and a silent bow to gut them at the first opportunity. I knelt down, ignoring the scandalized gasps from the guests, ignoring Celeste's sharp hiss of protest. I looked into the boy's terrified eyes, and I saw the truth he did not have the words to articulate. "Show me," I said, my voice low and calm. The boy nodded, his small hand slipping into mine. He led me through the crowd, weaving between tuxedos and ball gowns, his tiny feet carrying him with a purpose that belied his age. His mother followed, her sobs muffled by her hand, but I did not stop. I could not stop. We reached the doors to the grand salon, and the boy stopped, pointing a trembling finger at the centerpiece. The flowers were magnificent, a riot of orchids and lilies arranged in a cascading waterfall of petals. But as I stared at them, I saw the faint glint of wire, the subtle bulge beneath the blooms. I signaled to Marco, who appeared at my side in an instant. He leaned in, a small device in his hand, and swept it over the arrangement. The color drained from his face. "Vincent," he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. "It's wired. Enough C4 to level the entire West Wing." The party was over. The pretense was dead. The storm had finally arrived, and it had come in the form of a whisper from a child who was supposed to be invisible. The evacuation was a masterclass in controlled chaos. I gave the signal, a single tap of my index finger against my thigh, and the room transformed. My men moved with the silent precision of wolves, herding the guests toward the hidden exits with a calm that bordered on the inhuman. There were no screams, no panic, only the soft shuffle of expensive shoes and the rustle of silk as the elite of New York's underworld were ushered out of my home like cattle to the slaughter. They did not know what was happening, but they knew better than to ask. In my world, questions were a luxury only the dead could afford. I stood at the center of the ballroom, my hands clasped behind my back, my face a mask of stone. The bomb was still ticking somewhere in the grand salon, a countdown to oblivion that I had no intention of hearing. Marco was already coordinating the disarming team, his voice a low murmur into his earpiece. The rest of my men were sweeping the estate, searching for secondary devices, for any sign of the traitor who had dared to bring a weapon into my home. And through it all, I watched the guests flee, their masks of civility crumbling into naked fear. I watched the servants scatter, their faces pale and terrified. And I watched the boy, the little whisperer who had saved my life, clinging to his mother's hand as she tried to drag him toward the service exit. His name was Leo. I did not know it then, but I would remember that name. I would remember it for the rest of my life. The crowd thinned, and the ballroom fell silent save for the distant wail of sirens and the soft hum of the chandeliers. I stood alone in the center of the room, the weight of my empire pressing down on my shoulders, and I felt the cold hand of betrayal wrap around my throat. And then I heard the laughter. It was sharp and mocking, a sound that cut through the silence like a shard of glass. I turned, and my eyes fell on a small cluster of figures near the grand staircase. My cousin Julian stood at the center, his arm draped around his wife's shoulders, his face alight with cruel amusement. Beside him stood Celeste, her hand pressed to her chest in a gesture of theatrical relief, her lips curved into a smile that did not reach her eyes. Behind them, a handful of my so-called allies, their expressions a mixture of contempt and schadenfreude. "And there he is," Julian announced, his voice carrying across the empty ballroom. The great Vincent Moretti, brought low by a child's fairy tale. I have to say, cousin, I never thought I'd see the day when the King of New York would be saved by a servant's brat. The others laughed, a chorus of sycophantic mockery that made my blood run cold. Celeste joined in, her laugh a tinkling melody of false amusement. She stepped forward, her heels clicking against the marble floor, and placed a hand on my arm. "Honestly, Vincent," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "What were you thinking? A bomb in our home? It was probably just a toy, some childish prank. You've made a scene over nothing. Now the entire city will be talking about your paranoia, your weakness. Do you have any idea what this will do to our reputation?" I did not answer. I could not. The rage was a living thing inside me, a beast that clawed at the walls of my chest, demanding release. But I had spent a lifetime learning to control my anger, to channel it into cold, calculated action. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Julian stepped closer, his eyes glinting with malice. You know, cousin, it's almost poetic. The mighty Vincent Moretti, brought to his knees by a child's whisper. I wonder what the other families will say when they hear about this. I wonder if they'll still fear you, or if they'll see you for what you really are, a paranoid old man who's lost his touch. His wife giggled, a sound like breaking glass. Perhaps we should hire the little boy as a security consultant. He seems to be more effective than your entire team of bodyguards. The laughter swelled, a wave of mockery that crashed against my ears. I looked at them, these vipers in human skin, these parasites who had fed on my success while plotting my downfall. I saw the red flush of Julian's cheeks, the telltale glint of my mother's bracelet on his wife's wrist. I saw the hunger in Celeste's eyes, the ambition that had always lurked beneath her mask of adoration. They were not just mocking me. They were revealing themselves, showing me their true faces in the aftermath of the storm. But it was not their faces that held my attention. Behind them, near the service entrance, I saw Maria. She was crouched on the floor, her arms wrapped around Leo, her body shaking with silent sobs. Her face was buried in the boy's hair, and she was whispering something to him, words of comfort that I could not hear. But I could see the fear in her trembling shoulders, the desperation in her grip. She was not crying for herself. She was crying for her son, for the child who had been thrust into a world of monsters and violence. And Leo, the boy who had saved my life, was not crying at all. He was staring at Julian and Celeste, his small face a mask of confusion. He did not understand the cruelty, the viciousness of their words. He only knew that his mother was sad, and that these people were the cause of her sadness. His little hands were balled into fists at his sides, his jaw set with a stubborn resolve that reminded me of myself at his age. I walked toward them, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The laughter died as I approached, replaced by a tense, expectant hush. I knelt before Maria, my hand resting gently on Leo's shoulder. The boy flinched, but he did not pull away. You saved my life tonight, I said, my voice low and steady. You saved the lives of everyone in this house. And I will not forget it. Maria looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. Please, Mr. Moretti, she stammered. Please forgive my son's impertinence. He has a wild imagination. He didn't mean to cause any trouble. He's just a child. He doesn't understand. I silenced her with a look. He understands more than you give him credit for, I said. He saw what no one else saw. He did what no one else had the courage to do. And for that, he has earned my gratitude. I stood and turned to face Julian and Celeste. The mockery was gone from their faces, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. They had seen the shift in my gaze, the cold fury that I no longer bothered to hide. Get out of my sight, I ordered Julian. We have things to discuss. You, me, and the rest of the rats in my house. The blood drained from his face. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He turned and fled, his wife scurrying behind him like a frightened mouse. Celeste remained, her mask of innocence firmly in place. Vincent, darling, surely you don't believe. Leave, I said, my voice soft and deadly. Before I say something we both regret. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine for a crack in my resolve. Finding none, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking a sharp, angry rhythm against the marble floor. I stood alone in the ballroom, the silence pressing in around me. The beast in my chest was still growling, still hungry for blood. But I would not feed it tonight. Tonight, I would plan. Tonight, I would hunt. And tomorrow, the rats would learn what it meant to cross the king. The study was a tomb of dark wood and old blood. I sat behind my desk, the same desk where my father had signed his death warrant 50 years ago, and I watched Julian sweat through his custom silk shirt. The room was silent save for the ticking of a grandfather clock that had been in my family for 3 generations, a constant, rhythmic reminder that time was a currency even I could not hoard. My lieutenants flanked the door, their faces carved from granite, their hands resting on the weapons that had made me the undisputed king of this city. Julian was a wreck. His hair was plastered to his forehead, his hands trembling as he reached for the glass of whiskey I had not offered him. His wife had been sent to a holding room, her screams still echoing in the corridors. My mother's bracelet was on my desk now, a gaudy piece of jewelry that had been in our family vault for decades. The evidence was mounting, and Julian knew it. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The silence was louder than any scream. Let's begin, I said, my voice flat and cold. Tell me about the bomb. Julian licked his lips, his eyes darting toward the door as if seeking an escape that did not exist. Vincent, cousin, I swear to you, I had nothing to do with it. I'm a businessman, not a murderer. You know me. You've known me my whole life. I picked up a file from my desk and tossed it toward him. It landed with a soft thud, its contents spilling across the mahogany surface. Bank statements, encrypted messages, photographs of meetings that had been carefully documented by my intelligence network. The evidence was damning, a web of deceit that had been spun over the course of years. Your accounts show a series of wire transfers to a shell company, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. That shell company, in turn, made payments to a known arms dealer who specializes in remote detonation devices. The timing of the payments corresponds almost perfectly with the delivery of the floral arrangement. Do you still claim to be a simple businessman? Julian's face went pale, a sickly shade of gray that made him look like a corpse. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. The silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. I leaned forward, my elbows resting on the desk, my eyes boring into his. You are not the head of this viper's nest, Julian. You are a greedy, expendable asset. A pawn. And pawns, as you are about to learn, are always the first to be sacrificed. Tell me who is pulling your strings, and I will let you walk out of this room with your bones intact. He cracked. It was not a dramatic collapse, not a tearful confession. It was a slow, agonizing unraveling, a man realizing that his lies had crumbled to dust. He told me about the De La Cruz family, our rivals from the West Coast, who had promised him a seat at their table if he helped orchestrate my downfall. He told me about the money, the promises of power, the dream of a world where he was no longer the lesser cousin, the shadow in my light. But it was the next revelation that cut the deepest. It wasn't just me, Julian whispered, his voice barely audible. There were others. People closer to you. People you trusted. I felt the cold hand of betrayal tighten around my throat. Name them. He hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the door. Celeste, he finally said, the name falling from his lips like a curse. She's been working with the De La Cruz family for months. She's the one who gave them access to your schedule, your security protocols. She's the one who convinced me to take the money, to turn against you. She's been playing you from the beginning, Vincent. She never loved you. She only loved your throne. The words hit me like a physical blow, a punch to the gut that stole the breath from my lungs. I had known Celeste was ambitious, ruthless, capable of cruelty that rivaled my own. But I had never imagined she would betray me, not like this. I had given her everything. My name, my fortune, my trust. And she had used it all to dig my grave. I rose from my desk, my movements slow and deliberate. Julian shrank back in his chair, his hands raised in a futile gesture of defense. I walked around the desk and stood before him, my shadow falling across his trembling form. You will not die tonight, I said, my voice soft and deadly. Your death would be too merciful. You will live, Julian. You will live with the knowledge that you betrayed your family, and you will spend the rest of your days watching from the shadows as I destroy everyone who helped you. Starting with your wife. Starting with your children. Starting with every last person you have ever loved. He sobbed, a broken, pathetic sound that filled the room. I turned my back on him and gestured to my men. They dragged him away, his screams echoing in the corridors long after he had disappeared from sight. I stood alone in the study, the silence pressing in around me. The beast in my chest was roaring now, a primal hunger that demanded blood. But I would not give in to it. Not yet. There was still one person I needed to confront, one person whose betrayal cut deeper than all the others. I found Celeste in the East Wing, in the private quarters we had once shared. She was standing by the window, her back to me, her silhouette framed against the night sky. She did not turn when I entered, did not acknowledge my presence. She simply stood there, waiting. "I know," I said, my voice flat and cold. "I know everything, Celeste. The De La Cruz family. The wire transfers. The bomb." She turned to face me, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Fear, regret, it was gone before I could name it, replaced by a cold, calculated calm. "You think you can touch me?" she asked, her voice dripping with contempt. "You think you can take on my family? You are a king, Vincent, but you are not immortal. The De La Cruz family has already taken your most valuable assets. Marco is gone. Your network is compromised. You just haven't realized it yet." Her words were a grenade, and they exploded in my chest. I had known Marco was missing, but I had assumed he was simply out of contact, working on a lead. Now I understood the true depth of the conspiracy. They had not just attacked me, they had dismantled my empire piece by piece, using my own people as their weapons. I stared at Celeste, this woman I had once loved, and I felt nothing but cold, consuming rage. She had played me for a fool, and I had let her. But that was over now. The game was changing, and I was done playing by their rules. "Enjoy your victory while it lasts," I said, my voice soft and deadly. "Because it will not last long. I will find Marco. I will find every last person who helped you. And when I do, I will show you what it truly means to cross a king." I turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the corridors we had once shared. Her laughter followed me down the corridor, a haunting sound that I would not soon forget. But I did not look back. I could not afford to. The war had begun, and I would not stop until I had won. The service quarters were never meant for a king. I had not set foot in this part of the estate in years, not since I was a boy sneaking down to steal pastries from the kitchens. The corridors were narrow here, the ceilings low, the air thick with the smell of bleach and boiled cabbage. It was a world away from the marble and crystal of the upper floors, a world of invisible people who kept my empire running while the elite danced and plotted above their heads. I walked through those corridors now, my footsteps echoing against the linoleum floors. My men had tried to dissuade me, insisting that I should remain in the study, that the service quarters were beneath my station. But I had dismissed them with a single glance. There was nothing beneath my station tonight. Not when I had seen the face of true courage in the eyes of a servant's child. I found Maria in a small room at the end of the hall, a cramped space that she shared with her son. The walls were bare, the furniture sparse, but it was clean and orderly, a testament to a woman who took pride in her work. She was sitting on the edge of a narrow cot, her hands wringing a dish rag, her face pale and drawn. Leo was asleep beside her, his small chest rising and falling in a rhythm that was the only peace in this house of nightmares. Maria flinched when I entered, scrambling to her feet. "Mr. Moretti," she stammered, her voice trembling. "Please, forgive my son's impertinence. He has a wild imagination. He didn't mean to cause any trouble. He's just a child, he doesn't understand." I raised a hand, silencing her. "Maria, your son saved my life tonight. He saved the lives of everyone in this house. There is nothing to forgive." She stared at me, her eyes wide and uncertain. She was still clutching the dish rag, her knuckles white with tension. I could see the fear in her face, the desperate need to protect her child from the monsters that lurked in the shadows of my world. But there was something else in her eyes, something I had not expected. A guilt, a shame that went beyond the simple terror of a mother caught in the crossfire. "Maria," I said, my voice soft and steady. "What else are you not telling me?" she broke. The tears came in a flood, silent and unstoppable, streaming down her cheeks as she sank back onto the cot. Leo stirred but did not wake, his small hand reaching out to clutch his mother's sleeve. She held him close, her sobs muffled by his hair. "Please, Mr. Moretti," she whispered, her voice cracking with despair. "I never wanted this. I never meant to put anyone in danger. I just wanted to protect my family." I knelt before her, my hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Tell me what happened." She took a shuddering breath, and the story spilled out of her, a tale of fear and desperation that cut through the darkness of my heart. Her sister, Sophia, had been taken 2 days ago. Maria had received a message, a photo on her phone that showed Sophia tied to a chair, her face bruised and swollen, her eyes wide with terror. The message below the image was a simple threat: keep the boy quiet, or your sister's silence will be permanent. I felt the cold hand of fury wrap around my throat. They had targeted Maria, used her family as leverage to discredit Leo's warning. If the whisper had been dismissed as a child's fantasy, the bomb would have gone off, and I would have died a fool. They were covering their tracks with an innocent girl's life, and they had done it with the cold, calculated precision of predators who thought they were untouchable. Who took her? I asked, my voice flat and deadly. Maria shook her head, her sobs rising in pitch. I don't know. The message was anonymous. They told me if I said anything, if I told anyone, they would kill her. They said they had people watching me, watching Leo. They said they would hurt him if I tried to warn you. Her words were a knife to my heart. This woman, this servant who had been invisible to me for years, had been carrying this weight alone, terrified for her sister, terrified for her son. And still, she had done nothing to stop Leo from warning me. She had chosen to trust a stranger, a king, over the men who held her family hostage. I rose to my feet, my mind racing with plans and counterplans. The de la Cruz family had crossed a line, and they would pay for it with blood. But first, I had to make a promise. I looked down at Maria, her face streaked with tears, her body trembling with fear. And I made a vow that I would keep, no matter the cost. Maria, I said, my voice firm and resolute. You're safe. Leo is safe. And I give you my word, as the head of this family, I will find your sister. I will bring her home. And the people who did this will not be given the mercy of a quick death. They will suffer. They will beg for death, and I will deny them. That is my promise. She stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. Why would you do this for us? She whispered. We are nothing to you. We are servants. We are invisible. I reached down and placed my hand on her shoulder, a gesture that was as close to tenderness as I had ever shown another person. You are not invisible to me, Maria, I said. Your son saw what no one else saw. He did what no one else had the courage to do. And you trusted me with your secret, even when it meant risking your sister's life. That kind of loyalty, that kind of courage, is worth more than all the gold in this city. You are not invisible. You are family. She wept, a long, shuddering release of tension that seemed to drain the fear from her body. I stood in the small, cramped room, my hand on her shoulder, and I felt a shift in the fabric of my being. The king who had ruled through fear and violence was not gone, but he was changing. He was learning that power was not just about crushing your enemies. It was also about protecting the innocent. I left the service quarters with a new purpose burning in my chest. The hunt had begun, and I would not stop until I had found Sophia, until I had crushed the de la Cruz family and everyone who had helped them. The storm was coming, and when it hit, the world would remember the name Vincent Moretti. Not as a tyrant, but as a force of nature. An avenger. A protector. And in the shadows of my empire, a boy named Leo slept, his small hand still clutching his mother's sleeve. Dreaming of a world where kings knelt before the brave. The days that followed were a strange and unexpected awakening. I had spent my entire adult life surrounded by sycophants and schemers, men and women who smiled to my face while sharpening the knives they intended to plunge into my back. I had grown accustomed to the loneliness of power, the isolation that came with wearing a crown that was forged from the bones of my enemies. But in the wake of the bombing, something shifted. The walls of my fortress had been breached, and in the rubble, I found something I had never expected: a family. It began with small things. I found myself wandering down to the service quarters, not with the cold efficiency of a king inspecting his domain, but with a strange, almost hesitant curiosity. I wanted to see Leo, to watch the boy who had saved my life with nothing but a whisper and a child's intuition. I told myself it was practical, a way to keep an eye on the only witness who could testify to the conspiracy. But I knew it was more than that. There was something about the boy that drew me in, a resilience and a purity that I had long since lost. I found him in the garden one afternoon, kicking a pebble across the flagstones, his small shoulders slumped with a sadness that seemed too heavy for a child his age. His mother was working in the kitchens, and he had been left to his own devices, a quiet shadow in a world that had no place for him. I sat on the stone bench beside him, my presence a silent intrusion into his solitude. He looked up at me, his enormous eyes filled with a wariness that broke my heart. "What are you thinking about?" I asked. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the pebble at his feet. "My mom is sad," he finally said, his voice soft and trembling. "She's always scared. I want to make her not scared." The words hit me like a physical blow. This child, barely 4 years old, carried the weight of his mother's fear on his small shoulders. He had seen the darkness of my world, the violence and cruelty that lurked beneath the surface of polite society, and he had responded not with fear, but with a fierce, unwavering determination to protect the only person who mattered to him. I looked at him, and I saw myself. Not the hardened king I had become, but the boy I had once been, the boy who had watched his father bleed out on a warehouse floor, vowing never to be weak again. Leo was not weak. He was the strongest person I had ever met. "Your mom is scared because she loves you," I said, my voice softer than I had intended. "She wants to protect you from the bad things in the world. And I want to protect her. I want to protect both of you. That's why I'm going to find her sister. That's why I'm going to make the bad people pay." Leo looked at me, his eyes searching mine for the truth. "Are you the king?" he asked. I smiled, a rare and genuine expression that felt foreign on my face. "I am the king," I said. "And the king's job is to protect his people. You and your mom are my people now. You're my family." He nodded, a solemn acceptance that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 promises. And in that moment, I felt a shift in the core of my being. The king who had ruled through fear and violence was not gone, but he was changing. He was learning that power was not just about crushing your enemies. It was also about protecting the innocent. I began to visit more often, spending time with Leo in the garden, teaching him the names of the flowers, showing him the small, hidden corners of the estate that the servants were too busy to notice. Maria watched me with a wary, uncertain gaze, but she did not interfere. She was still afraid, still burdened by the weight of her sister's captivity, but she was beginning to trust me. It was a fragile trust, a seed that I would nurture with the same care I had once devoted to building my empire. The transformation was not lost on my men. They watched me with a mixture of confusion and respect, unsure of what to make of their king, who had suddenly developed a fondness for a servant's child. But I did not care what they thought. I had spent my life worrying about the opinions of others, crafting a persona of ruthless invincibility that had become a cage. Now, I was learning to be something else. Something more human. One evening, I found Maria in the kitchens, alone and weeping. The stress of the past weeks had finally caught up with her, and she had collapsed under the weight of her fear. I sat beside her, my hand on her shoulder, and I made her a promise that I had never made to anyone else. "Maria," I said, my voice firm and resolute. "I will not rest until I have found your sister. I will tear this city apart if I have to. I will burn the de la Cruz family to the ground. And when it is done, you and Leo will never have to be afraid again. You have my word." She looked at me, her eyes red and swollen, her face streaked with tears. "Why," she whispered, "why do you care so much? We are nothing to you." I reached down and took her hand, a gesture that was as close to tenderness as I had ever shown another person. "You are not nothing," I said. "You are everything. You are the reason I am still alive. You and Leo showed me that there is more to this world than power and revenge. You showed me that there is still something worth fighting for. And I will never forget that." She wept, a long, shuddering release of tension that seemed to drain the fear from her body. I sat with her in the silence, my hand in hers, and I felt a strange, unexpected warmth spread through my chest. It was not the cold fire of vengeance that had always driven me. It was something else. Something I had not felt in a very long time. It was hope. The hunt for Sophia was already underway, but I knew now that it was more than just a mission of vengeance. It was a mission of redemption. I had spent my life building an empire on the ashes of my enemies, but I had never built anything that would last. Not until now. Not until the boy with the whisper had shown me the true meaning of legacy. And as I sat in the dim, quiet kitchen, holding the hand of a woman who had once been invisible, I made a silent vow to myself. I would find her sister. I would destroy the de la Cruz family. And when it was done, I would build a new kingdom. A kingdom built not on fear, but on loyalty. Not on violence, but on protection. A kingdom where the brave and the innocent would never have to be afraid again. The motel was a monument to despair. It sat on the outskirts of Queens, a crumbling relic of a time when roadside America had meant something more than cheap thrills and cheaper lives. The neon sign flickered with a dying buzz, its letters half dark, promising vacancies that no one in their right mind would ever fill. The parking lot was littered with broken glass and the ghosts of forgotten dreams, and the air smelled of mildew and regret. I had come here alone, against the advice of every man who had ever sworn to protect me. But this was not a mission for soldiers. This was a reckoning, a confrontation that required the kind of intimacy that only a king and his most trusted knight could share. Marco had been my shadow for 20 years, my shield, my brother in all but blood. And now he had become my betrayer. I found him in room 12, a cramped space that smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. He was sitting on the edge of a sagging bed, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He did not look up when I entered, did not reach for the weapon I knew he had hidden beneath his pillow. He had been waiting for me, and he had accepted his fate. "Vincent," he said, his voice a broken rasp. "I knew you would find me. I was hoping you would. I couldn't live with myself any longer." I closed the door behind me, the click of the lock a finality that echoed in the silence. I did not sit. I stood in the center of the room, my hands clasped behind my back, my face a mask of cold fury. The beast in my chest was roaring, demanding blood, but I would not give it the satisfaction. "Not yet. Tell me everything," I said, my voice flat and emotionless. "Start from the beginning, and do not leave anything out." He looked up at me, his face a wreck of guilt and shame. His eyes were red-rimmed, his cheeks hollow, his hair unkempt and gray. He was a shadow of the man who had stood by my side through 100 battles, and the sight of him filled me with a rage that was as cold as it was consuming. But I did not strike him. I waited. And he talked. The story poured out of him like poison from a wound, a confession that was as much a plea for forgiveness as it was a chronicle of his sins. It had started a year ago, when his daughter, Elena, had been diagnosed with a rare and aggressive form of leukemia. The treatments were experimental, the costs astronomical, and Marco, for all his power and influence, had been helpless to save her. Then the de la Cruz family had come calling. They had offered him a deal, a devil's bargain that he had been too desperate to refuse. They would pay for Elena's treatment, secure the best doctors, even provide a donor match for a bone marrow transplant. In exchange, he would feed them information on my movements, my operations, my weaknesses. He would become a spy in my inner circle, a traitor who wore the mask of loyalty. "I didn't know about the bomb," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "They told me it was just a distraction, a way to get you out of the house for a meeting with a rival family. I swear to you, Vincent, on my daughter's life, I did not know they were going to try to kill you." I stared at him, my mind racing. The betrayal was a knife to my heart, but the reason was a poison that explained everything. Marco was not a man who had been bought by greed or ambition. He was a broken father, a man who had been forced to choose between his loyalty to his king and his love for his child. "I was a coward," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I was so afraid of losing her that I was willing to sacrifice everything else. My honor, my loyalty, our friendship. I thought I could control it, that I could give them just enough to keep them satisfied without actually hurting you. But I was wrong. I was so wrong." I stood in the silence, the weight of his confession pressing down on me. The beast in my chest was still roaring, but it was no longer demanding blood. It was demanding something else. Something far more difficult to give. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Why didn't you run? Why didn't you try to disappear?" He laughed, a hollow, broken sound. Because there is nowhere I can go that you cannot find me, Vincent. You are the king. You own this city, this state, half the shadows on the eastern seaboard. I knew you would find me. And I knew that when you did, you would show me the mercy I do not deserve. I walked toward him, my footsteps heavy against the stained carpet. I stood before him, my shadow falling across his trembling form, and I made a decision that would change everything. You will not die tonight, Marco, I said, my voice soft and deadly. Your death would be too merciful. Instead, you will live. You will live with the weight of what you have done, and you will spend the rest of your days trying to earn back a fraction of the trust you have destroyed. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. I don't understand. What do you want from me? I knelt before him, my hand gripping his shoulder with a force that made him flinch. I want you to help me find Sophia, I said. The maid's sister. She is being held by the de la Cruz family, and she is the key to everything. You will help me rescue her. You will help me bring down the men who tried to destroy me. And when it is done, you will go back to your daughter, and you will spend the rest of your life watching her grow up, knowing that you are alive only because I chose to show you mercy. He wept, a raw, broken sound that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. I did not comfort him. I could not. But I did not turn away from him either. I will do it, he said, his voice trembling. I will do whatever you ask. I will spend the rest of my life trying to earn back your trust. I rose to my feet, my gaze cold and unyielding. You can start by telling me everything you know about the de la Cruz operation. Every detail. Every weakness. Every shadow in which they hide. We're going to war, Marco. And this time, we will not stop until we have won. He nodded, his face pale but resolute. And in the silence of that crumbling motel room, the first pieces of my vengeance began to fall into place. The moon was a thin crescent of silver, hanging low over the restless sea like a broken promise. It was the only light we would have, and it was enough. I stood on the deck of a black-hulled boat, the salt spray cold against my face, the roar of the engines a muted growl beneath my feet. Behind me, a flotilla of identical vessels cut through the waves, their crews silent and armed, their eyes fixed on the distant shoreline. We were an army of shadows, a force that had been forged in the fires of betrayal and tempered by the cold steel of vengeance. The de la Cruz villa rose from the cliffs like a monument to hubris, a sprawling palace of white stone and dark glass that had been built on the bones of my enemies. It was a fortress, heavily guarded and heavily armed, a testament to the power of the family that had tried to destroy me. But tonight, it would become their tomb. Marco stood beside me, his face pale and drawn, his hands gripping the railing with white-knuckled intensity. He had given me everything, the layout of the villa, the patrol routes, the location of the safe room where Esteban de la Cruz would almost certainly be hiding. It was a testament to his desperation, his need to earn back a fraction of the trust he had destroyed. She's in the wine cellar, he said, his voice barely audible above the wind. They have her in a holding room near the back, guarded by two of de la Cruz's most loyal enforcers. The rest of the security is concentrated on the main entrances. If we go in from the sea, we can reach her before they even know we're there. I nodded, my gaze fixed on the villa's silhouette. And the rest of the family, Marco hesitated. Esteban will be in the safe room on the second floor. He has a panic button that will alert the local authorities, but we have jammers in place. He will be alone, Vincent. He will be defenseless. The words were a promise, a gift that I had been waiting for my entire life. I turned to my men, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of the instruments on the bridge, and I gave the order that would change everything. Move in. Silent. Lethal. No one gets out alive except the girl. The boats surged forward, their engines cutting out as we drifted toward the rocky shore. My men moved like wraiths, their boots silent against the damp sand, their weapons gleaming in the pale moonlight. I was the first to step onto the beach, my feet sinking into the cold, wet sand, my heart pounding with a rhythm that was older than time. We reached the villa's perimeter in minutes, a wall of stone and iron that was designed to keep out the uninvited. But I was not uninvited. I was a king, and no wall could keep a king from reclaiming what was his. The guards on the beach were the first to fall, their throats cut before they could even reach for their radios. My men swept through the compound with a ruthless efficiency, their movements practiced and precise, their weapons singing a song of death that was as beautiful as it was terrible. I walked through the chaos, my hands clasped behind my back, my face a mask of cold indifference. I did not raise a weapon. I did not need to. I was surrounded by men who had sworn to die for me, and they would not fail. We reached the villa's main entrance, a massive door of carved oak that was designed to intimidate. I did not knock. I did not wait. I simply raised my foot and kicked it open, the wood splintering under the force of my blow. Inside, the villa was a chaos of screaming guests and fleeing servants, a scene of panic that was as satisfying as it was predictable. The elite of the de la Cruz family were running, their masks of civility stripped away by the terror of the moment. I did not stop for them. I did not care. I moved through the corridors with a single-minded purpose, my men flanking me, their weapons trained on every shadow. We reached the wine cellar, a vast underground chamber filled with the scent of aged oak and old dust. The guards were waiting for us, their faces hardened with a resolve that was as foolish as it was brave. They did not last long. My men moved like wolves, their blades flashing in the dim light, their targets falling before they could even scream. I walked past the bodies, my footsteps echoing in the silence, and I found her. Sophia was huddled in the corner of a small holding room, her wrists bound with zip ties, her face swollen and bruised. She was young, barely out of her teens, and her eyes were wide with a terror that cut through the cold fury of my heart. I knelt before her, my hands gentle as I cut her bonds. She flinched at my touch, but she did not pull away. She stared at me, her gaze searching mine, and I saw in her eyes the same fierce resilience that I had seen in her nephew. "Who are you, the king?" she asked, her voice trembling. I smiled, a rare and genuine expression that seemed to surprise us both. "Tonight, I am your guardian," I said. "Come with me. I'm taking you home." I helped her to her feet, my arm wrapped around her shoulders as I led her through the chaos of the villa. The guests were still screaming, the guards still fighting, but I did not care. I had what I had come for, and nothing else mattered. We reached the main ballroom just as the last of the resistance crumbled. Esteban de la Cruz was dragged before me, his face pale and trembling, his hands bound behind his back. He was an old man, his hair white and thinning, his eyes filled with the terror of a predator who had become prey. "Vincent," he stammered, his voice cracking with fear. "Please, Mercy. I can give you anything. Money, power, women. Just spare my life." I looked at him, this man who had tried to kill me, who had used a child's innocence as a weapon, who had threatened the lives of the innocent to cover his tracks. And I felt nothing but cold, consuming rage. I reached down and picked up a vase from the mantelpiece, a piece of priceless Chinese porcelain that had been in the de la Cruz family for generations. I held it up to the light, its delicate beauty a stark contrast to the ugliness of the man who owned it. "This is your world, Esteban," I said, my voice soft and deadly. "Beautiful, fragile, and about to shatter." I let it fall. The vase exploded against the marble floor, 1,000 pieces scattering across the room, a perfect metaphor for the legacy that was about to die. "You will not die tonight," I said, my gaze cold and unyielding. "Your death would be too merciful. Instead, you will watch everything you have built crumble to dust. You will watch your family fall. You will watch your empire burn. And when it is all gone, you will spend the rest of your life in a prison of your own making, knowing that you brought it all upon yourself." I turned my back on him, my hand still resting on Sophia's shoulder. The hunt was over. The vengeance had begun. And in the ashes of the de la Cruz Empire, a new kingdom would rise. The morning after the siege was a symphony of silence. The villa had been secured, its occupants either fled or dead, its walls echoing with the ghosts of a dynasty that had crumbled in a single night. I stood on the balcony overlooking the sea, the salt wind cold against my face, and I watched the sun rise over the ruins of my enemy's empire. It was a beautiful morning, the kind that poets wrote about, but I felt no poetry in my heart. Only a cold, consuming satisfaction that was as close to peace as I had ever known. The cleanup had begun. My men moved through the villa with the precision of undertakers, cataloging the evidence, securing the assets, ensuring that no trace of the de la Cruz family would remain to haunt me. Esteban had been taken to a secure location, a private facility where he would spend the rest of his days in a cell that was as comfortable as it was inescapable. His family had been scattered, their fortunes seized, their names erased from the ledgers of power. It was a bloodless revolution, a dismantling that was as thorough as it was absolute. But there were still loose ends to tie. Celeste and her father had been brought to the estate, their arrival timed to coincide with the first light of dawn. They were waiting for me in the study, the same room where I had confronted Julian, the same room where the foundations of my vengeance had been laid. I took my time getting there, savoring the anticipation, letting their fear build in the silence of my absence. When I finally entered, they were both pale and trembling, their masks of superiority stripped away by the weight of their crimes. Celeste was no longer the porcelain doll who had graced my arm at the party. She was a hollow shell, her eyes red-rimmed, her hair disheveled, her designer gown replaced by a simple dress that did nothing to hide the desperation in her posture. Her father sat beside her, his hands bound, his face a mask of shame. I took my seat behind the desk, the same desk where my father had signed his death warrant, and I looked at them with a cold, unyielding gaze. "Celeste," I said, my voice flat and emotionless. "You have betrayed me. You have conspired with my enemies to destroy everything I have built. You have tried to kill me, and you have threatened the lives of the innocent. Do you have anything to say for yourself?" She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The mask of confidence that had always defined her had crumbled, revealing the coward beneath. She had been a predator in a world of prey, but now she was the prey, and she did not know how to survive. "Please, Vincent," she finally whispered, her voice cracking with desperation. "I never wanted to hurt you. I was ambitious. I wanted more than what you could give me. But I love you. I have always loved you. Please, give me another chance. I will do anything. I will be anything you want. Just please, don't destroy me." I stared at her, this woman who had once been the center of my world, and I felt nothing. The love I had once felt for her had been burned away by the fire of her betrayal, leaving only ash and cold, hard truth. "Love," I repeated, the word tasting like poison on my tongue. "You do not know the meaning of the word. Love is what Maria feels for her son. Love is what Marco feels for his daughter. Love is what I feel for the people who have shown me loyalty in my darkest hour. What you felt for me was not love. It was greed. It was ambition. It was a hunger that could never be satisfied. And now it has destroyed you." I turned to her father, a man who had once been my ally, a senator who had used his power to protect my interests. He had sold me out for a promise of greater influence, and now he was paying the price. "Your daughter will not die," I said, my voice soft and deadly. "Death would be too merciful. Instead, she will live. She will live in the gutter, stripped of her title, her money, and her reputation. She will be a pariah, a woman who will spend the rest of her days begging for scraps in a world that has no place for her. And you, Senator, you will watch. You will watch your daughter fall, and you will know that you brought it all upon yourself." Her father sobbed, a broken, pathetic sound that filled the room. Celeste stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief, as if she could not comprehend the fate that awaited her. "You would do that to me," she whispered. "After everything we shared, after everything I gave you," I rose from my desk, my shadow falling across her trembling form. "You gave me nothing, Celeste. You took my trust, my love, my future. And now I am taking it all back. Enjoy your fall. It will be a long one." I gestured to my men, who stepped forward and took her by the arms. She screamed, a primal sound of rage and despair, as they dragged her from the room. Her father followed, his sobs echoing in the corridor long after they had disappeared from sight. I stood alone in the study, the silence pressing in around me. The beast in my chest was silent now, sated by the justice I had delivered. But I did not feel victorious. I felt tired. The weight of my crown had never been heavier. And yet, as I looked out the window at the rising sun, I felt a flicker of something I had not expected. It was hope. The hope that, in the ashes of my vengeance, something new could grow. Something better. Something worthy of the loyalty that had saved my life. The kingdom was changing. And I was changing with it. The weeks that followed were quiet, a strange and unfamiliar peace that settled over the estate like a blanket of snow. The parties had stopped. The vultures had been driven off. The corridors that had once echoed with the hollow laughter of the elite were now filled with the soft hum of ordinary life. It was a transformation that felt almost surreal, as if I had stepped into a dream that I had never dared to imagine. I spent my days in the garden, watching Leo as he explored the grounds with the boundless curiosity of a child who had never been given the chance to be young. He had changed in the weeks since the siege, his wariness replaced by a cautious trust, his silence giving way to the occasional laugh that was as precious as gold. Maria watched him with a smile that was no longer tinged with fear, her eyes bright with a hope that I had not seen in her before. Sophia had recovered from her ordeal, her physical wounds healing under the care of the estate's doctors. She was a quiet presence in the house, her gratitude a constant reminder of the lives I had saved. She spent her days helping her sister in the kitchens, her laughter a soft echo that seemed to fill the empty spaces of the estate. And then there was Marco. I had not forgiven him. I was not sure I ever could. But I had given him a chance to earn back a fraction of the trust he had destroyed, and he had taken it with a desperation that was almost painful to witness. He had returned to his duties, his movements still shadowed by guilt, his eyes still haunted by the weight of his betrayal. But he was trying. He was fighting to redeem himself, and that was more than I had ever expected. One evening, I found him in the study, staring at the portrait of my father that hung above the fireplace. He did not turn when I entered, but I saw his shoulders tense, felt the weight of his shame in the silence that stretched between us. "Vincent," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I have been thinking about what you said. About redemption. About the chance to earn back what I have lost. And I have realized that there is only one way I can ever truly repay you." I walked toward him, my footsteps heavy against the hardwood floor. "And what is that?" He turned to face me, his eyes red-rimmed but steady. "I will never betray you again. I will spend the rest of my life proving that I am worthy of the trust you have given me. I will protect you, Vincent. Not because I am paid to, but because I owe you my life." I stared at him, this man who had once been my brother, and I felt the cold wall around my heart crack, just a little. I did not embrace him. I did not forgive him. But I nodded, a small gesture that was as close to acceptance as I could offer. "That is all I ask," I said. "That you try. That you fight. That you never forget what you have done, and that you use it to make yourself better." He nodded, a silent vow that seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 promises. And in that moment, I felt a shift in the fabric of my being. The king who had ruled through fear and violence was not gone, but he was changing. He was learning that power was not just about crushing your enemies. It was also about protecting the innocent. And sometimes, it was about offering a second chance to those who had lost their way. I left the study and walked through the corridors of the estate, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I found Maria in the garden, sitting on the stone bench where Leo and I had first talked, her face lit by the soft glow of the setting sun. "Mr. Moretti," she said, rising to her feet. "I was just about to put Leo to bed. Would you like to say goodnight?" I nodded, a warmth spreading through my chest that I had not expected. I walked with her to the small room in the service quarters, the same cramped space where I had first learned the truth about her sister's captivity. It was still sparse, still humble, but it was filled with a warmth that no amount of luxury could replicate. Leo was sitting on his cot, his small hands clutching a worn stuffed bear that had seen better days. He looked up when I entered, his eyes bright with a trust that made my heart ache. "Vincent," he said, his voice soft and sleepy. "Are you going to stay?" I sat on the edge of his cot, my hand resting gently on his shoulder. "I am," I said. "I will always stay, Leo. You and your mother are my family now, and I will never let anyone hurt you again." He smiled, a small, sleepy expression that seemed to light up the entire room. "I knew you would come," he said. "I knew you would keep us safe." I tucked him in, a gesture that felt as natural as breathing, and I watched as his eyes fluttered closed, his breathing evening out into the rhythm of sleep. Maria stood in the doorway, her eyes glistening with tears, her hand pressed to her heart. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything. For saving my sister. For protecting my son. For giving us a home." I rose to my feet, my hand still resting on Leo's shoulder. "You do not need to thank me, Maria. You and Leo gave me something I did not even know I was missing. You gave me a reason to be more than just a king. You gave me a family." I walked out of the room, my heart lighter than it had been in years. The estate was quiet now, but it was no longer empty. It was filled with the echoes of laughter, the warmth of love, the promise of a future that was no longer defined by violence and betrayal. The kingdom was changing. And I was changing with it. The king who had once ruled through fear was learning to rule through loyalty. And in the eyes of a child, I had found the legacy I had never known I was seeking. The years passed like shadows, silent and swift, leaving their mark on the estate like the slow creep of ivy on ancient stone. The boy who had whispered a warning in the midst of chaos had grown into a young man, his small frame replaced by a wiry strength, his fearful eyes now sharp and steady. Leo was 16 now, tall and lean, with a quiet intensity that reminded me of myself at his age. But there was something in him that I had never possessed. A warmth, a capacity for trust, a belief in the goodness of others that no amount of darkness had been able to extinguish. I stood on the balcony of the estate, the same balcony where I had watched the sun rise over the ruins of the De La Cruz Empire, and I watched Leo as he prepared for his first official task. He was dressed in a sharp black suit, his hair combed back, his posture straight and confident. He looked like a prince ready to claim his throne, and in a way he was. He was the heir to a kingdom that had been built on the foundations of a child's courage. Maria stood beside me, her hand resting on my arm, her eyes fixed on her son with a mixture of pride and worry. She had aged gracefully in the years since the siege, her face lined with the wisdom of a woman who had endured more than her share of hardship. She was no longer the frightened maid who had wept in the service quarters. She was a matriarch, a pillar of strength who had become my most trusted advisor. "Are you sure about this, Vincent?" she asked, her voice a quiet murmur. "He's still just a boy." I turned to her, a genuine smile on my face. "He was just a boy the night he saved my life," I said. "He saved us all, Maria. He earned the right to learn the family business. And besides, it's just a negotiation. A minor family, a small dispute. He will have my men with him. He will be safe." She nodded, but I could see the worry in her eyes, the same worry that had been there the night Leo had first stepped into the spotlight. It was the worry of a mother who had seen too much darkness to believe that the light would last. I placed my hand over hers, a gesture of reassurance that had become second nature over the years. "He will be fine, Maria. He is stronger than you know. Stronger than even he knows. And he is not alone. He never will be." Leo turned from the car, his gaze meeting mine across the courtyard. He smiled, a confident expression that seemed to bridge the years between the frightened child and the young man he had become. I nodded to him, a silent acknowledgement of the trust one had placed in him, and he returned the gesture before climbing into the car. I watched as the vehicle disappeared through the gates, its taillights fading into the distance. The estate fell silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on me like a familiar burden. I had spent my life building an empire on the ashes of my enemies, but this was different. This was not about conquest or vengeance. This was about legacy. I walked through the corridors of the estate, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The portraits on the walls had changed over the years, the stern faces of my ancestors replaced by images of the people who had become my family. Maria, Sophia, Leo. They were the new bloodline, the heirs to a kingdom that had been reborn in the fires of betrayal. I found myself in the garden, the same garden where Leo and I had first talked, where he had confessed his wish to make his mother unafraid. The flowers were in full bloom, a riot of color that seemed to pulse with life. I sat on the stone bench, the same bench where I had made a promise to a frightened child, and I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for most of my life. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. I thought of the boy who had whispered a warning in the chaos of a party, who had saved my life with nothing but his courage. I thought of the woman who had wept in the service quarters, who had trusted me with her sister's life. I thought of the man who had betrayed me, who had spent years trying to earn back a fraction of the trust he had destroyed. And I thought of the future. A future that was no longer defined by violence and betrayal, but by loyalty and protection. A future where the brave and the innocent would never have to be afraid again. The car returned an hour later, its headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. Leo stepped out, his face alight with the satisfaction of a job well done. He walked toward me, his steps quick and eager, and I rose to meet him. It went well, he said, his voice steady and proud. The negotiation was successful. They agreed to our terms. I placed my hand on his shoulder, a gesture that had become a tradition between us. I knew you would succeed, Leo. You are the future of this family. And the future is bright. He smiled, a genuine expression that seemed to light up the entire garden. Thank you, Vincent. For everything. For giving me a chance. For giving me a family. I looked at him, this young man who had once been a frightened child, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest. The king who had ruled through fear and violence was gone, replaced by a man who had found his purpose in the eyes of a child. The empire was no longer just about power. It was about legacy. It was about redemption. It was about the profound, unexpected gift of an innocent whisper. I put my arm around his shoulder, and we walked together toward the estate, the lights of the house glowing warm and welcoming in the darkness. The king was dead. Long live the family. The night settled over the estate like a velvet shroud, soft and complete, carrying with it the scent of night-blooming jasmine and the distant murmur of the sea. I stood at the window of my study, the glass cool against my fingertips, and watched the lights of the city glitter on the horizon like scattered diamonds. The city that had once been my battlefield, my kingdom, my cage. Now it was simply home. Leo had retired to his quarters, his first official task completed with a grace that had surprised even me. Maria had kissed his forehead and whispered her prayers, her faith as steady as the stars above. Sophia had laughed and hugged her nephew, her joy a bright flame in the quiet of the evening. And Marco, my once broken knight, had saluted the boy with a reverence that spoke of redemption earned through years of silent penance. That I had built an empire on fear. I had ruled through blood and betrayal, through the cold calculus of power that left no room for weakness. But the empire that stood around me now was built on something far more durable. It was built on trust, on loyalty, on the unshakable bond between a king and the family he had chosen. I thought of the boy who had whispered in my ear, his small hand clutching my sleeve, his voice trembling with a courage that had saved my life. I thought of the mother who had wept in the service quarters, her faith in me a fragile gift that I had held with both hands. I thought of the sister who had been a hostage, the knight who had been a traitor, and the woman who had been a viper. They had all shaped me, forged me into something I had never expected to be. The king was gone. In his place stood a man who had found his purpose in the eyes of a child, who had discovered that true power was not in the ability to destroy, but in the capacity to protect. The crown I wore now was not forged from iron and blood. It was woven from the threads of love and loyalty, from the bonds that had been tested in fire and found unbreakable. I turned from the window and walked through the quiet corridors of the estate. The portraits on the walls seemed to watch me pass, their painted eyes following my progress. But they were no longer the stern faces of my ancestors, the ghosts of a legacy built on violence. They were the faces of my family, the people who had given me a reason to be more than just a king. I paused at the door to Leo's room, my hand resting on the cool wood. I could hear his soft breathing, the rhythm of a young man at peace. He had grown so much, this boy who had once been invisible. He had become the heir to a kingdom that was no longer defined by fear, but by hope. I walked on, my steps carrying me to the garden, the same garden where it had all begun. The moon was full, its silver light spilling across the flowers like a benediction. I sat on the stone bench, the cool marble a familiar comfort against my palms, and I let the silence wash over me. The kingdom was safe. The family was whole. And the whisper that had saved my life had become a legacy that would endure long after I was gone. The king was dead. Long live the family.